Well, hello, free people of the Rocky Mountain region. This is the second video in a series regarding the 2023 Colorado property tax situation. In the first part, Natalie and I discussed the recent political history of property taxes, and in this video, we will discuss how to look up your property taxes and explain how your property taxes are calculated. Well, Natalie, I'm very excited to learn and share actionable information that property owners can use to push back against the authoritarian agenda of Colorado politicians who are using this high property tax crisis to eliminate the Taxpayer Bill of Rights.
I'm glad to be here and hoping to share knowledge with people about how the property taxes are calculated, as you mentioned, explain the government's roles in setting these different rates, because as we get to later in the year and we have a ballot issue about the subject of property taxes, that knowledge, that information will help people make an educated decision and see that there are options, and Prop HH is a hoax and we don't want to go with that. So first, we're going to start with how much am I paying in property taxes? Now, for some people, they're not paying the bill directly. They've got a mortgage company, so the mortgage company got the bill. You'll get a copy, but perhaps you don't know how to interpret it. What are all these different mill levies and the different things? And what is the government's role in setting these rates? Why do we have a statewide ballot issue when ultimately we don't pay property taxes to the state? So why are they involved? And understanding the calculation, because it takes a little bit of information. So I'm going to go through these slides and hopefully we can cover the basic questions. And if anybody has follow-up questions, I think they can post those in the comment section, and we'll be happy to address those in a future video, because there's a lot of information to it. So starting with, first of all, how do you determine the actual value and what are the estimated property taxes coming up? Because even though we've seen increases over years, we are going to see what is called by many shocking property tax increases this next January. That's when people are going to get their bill. So right now, this process we're in is this stage of the year, in the May and June period, is when property values are determined. And then you'll be paying the property taxes on those next January 2024. That's when people are going to, if they haven't been paying attention up until that point, their jaws are going to probably drop a little bit, depending on where they are. So the first step is to understand that the county assessor is one that determines the value. So you're going to go to the county's website, find that section. Generally, they'll be in one of the quick links, if that's an option, or the search bar, just looking for property lookup. And many times it'll link you right to that. There's going to be some search fields that you'll populate with your address or whatever property you're looking up. Property taxes not only apply to residential properties, commercial properties, but also business personal property taxes. So depending on those, you may be looking up, maybe not your home address, but your business address, something along that line. When you find the results for the property, it's going to give you the ownership, the classification, the values. It'll also have some additional information, such as the taxing entities that you're paying property taxes to, and the mill levies. It also includes comparable sales. That's of interest to many people right now, because I stated we're in the process where we're trying to determine the value. And there are many, actually, probably a record amount of people who have protested their property tax value this year. I know I've heard from at least a few counties where they're well above the prior years in the amount of people who are using that process. Comparable sales are how the assessor sets your value for the property. So having that information they've used to determine the value is also found in the same process. So then when you get to where you found the property you're looking for, you are going to be able to generally see a link right there tied to the property that will be described as taxes or estimated property taxes. You can also look at the prior tax years. Should be noted when you are looking up your property taxes, you're paying them to the county itself, to the treasurer's office. So it's notable, the assessor sets the value, but when you go to pay the bill, you're paying it to the treasurer. The treasurer then dispenses it to all these entities called sometimes child organizations, meaning a parent and a child, not like childish, but parent and a child kind of a relationship. And what's notable there is you are paying property taxes to local districts. That includes counties, schools, cities, special districts. There's water, fire, metropolitan, recreational. In Colorado, we have just under 3,000 local governments. So it's quite a long list. But what I wanted to point out here also is that we do not pay a state property tax. It's actually one of the protections in the Taxpayer's Bill of Rights. And why I'm mentioning that is because we're looking at an upcoming ballot issue, which is kind of the core of why we're doing these presentations, where the state is saying, we want you to give up you're not going to get your TABOR refunds in the way you expect, and some of you won't get it at all. And we're going to instead divert it to property tax relief. So somebody would say, well, wait, I just heard I pay local governments are who's getting my property taxes. Why is the state involved in this process at all? So it's important to note this role. Going back, the county assessor determines the value, whether it's real property like vacant land, land with a house on it, commercial property, but also business personal property. And as a reminder for those who don't know, what is that? Businesses that own above a certain amount, well, it's determined on all your business personal property, but you get taxed on the portion above a certain threshold. And it's above $50,000. So if you have a business that has a lot of equipment, even going down to computers, tools, things like that, people are paying property taxes. Those values are all determined by the assessor. They determine the value, but the state legislature sets the assessment rate. And we're going to give a better graphic on that in just a moment, because these are a lot of terms that people are not used to in their regular day-to-day life. That actual value that the assessor sent to you is then multiplied by the rate that the state assembly or the legislature set. And what that produces from that math equation is an assessed value. Oops, sorry there. And again, that's just to reinforce your property taxes, and this is kind of giving in a reverse way. Your property taxes are basically set by multiplying that rate that is set by the local taxing authorities, called a mill levy, by that actual that assessment rate, set by the state. And should be noted, tax rates known as these mill levies, which we'll go into in just a moment, are not finalized until December of this year. So even though we can calculate property taxes right now, it's based on an estimate. The local governments later this year, usually in the October or the November timeframe, as an elected body, will set the mill levies. And this is where local activists and concerned property owners, those who want to have better control of the future of the taxation for their holdings, their land, their home, whatever it may be, can affect this process by becoming involved with the local government when they go to set that mill rate or mill levy. So these assessment rates that are set by the state used to be fairly simple. There was residential and there was non-residential. And if you included vacant land or had vacant land, agricultural land, those would be put into the non-residential. Well, now the state legislature is actually, due to some shenanigans a couple years ago, to basically kneecap a citizen initiative to cap property taxes, the state legislature decided, well, we're going to change the classifications. So now instead of just residential, non-residential, we've got more categories. So you can see here, residential, we've got set at this assessment rate, 6.765. Agricultural renewable energy, what used to be just called non-residential, is at a much higher rate. See 26.4. Oil and gas, 87.5. That's pretty high. Vacant land, commercial, industrial, all bulked together at that 27.9. So now I see audience members probably trying their eyes glazing over going, oh my God, you just gave me all of these percentages and numbers and I don't know what all this means. So I'm going to skip down to this slide right here and I'll backtrack too. Then we're taking that actual value assessor set. Then we have multiplied by the assessment rate from the state legislature. Gives you now the assessed value. So it's going to be a smaller amount than what you got on that valuation notice you got in the mail in May of this year, and you can protest. We then take that assessed value times the mill levies that each little local government is setting. And then that equals the taxes due. And I realize now I should have probably lined the slides up a little bit differently, but it's okay. We're just going to go back to here to talk about those mill levies. That was part of that equation. So again, each local taxing entity, like school district, county, city, fire district, all of those, even metropolitan districts, set their own mill levy. And that's listed when you go to the county website and you're looking up your property value and then go to the link about the taxes. That's where you're going to see each of these mill levies set. It should be noted, the mill levies are part of that equation, that the local governments, unlike what Proposition HH is trying to hoax us with, that the state should be involved in the process, those who are watching should know, like I described before, mill levies are where an average person can go before that local body and say, in November of this upcoming November, our property values have skyrocketed. These are shocking increases. And the fact of the day is, we don't have to go along with Prop HH, which is ultimately going to eliminate TABOR refunds, because these local governments, without even having to go to voters, can lower the mill levy. And when you lower the mill levy, you're changing that mathematical formula and basically capping the government to say, we understand, just like TABOR provides local governments actually with growth. It allows them to increase revenue. Governments like to scream that it shuts them down, but that's not the case, and we can see that. These local governments can reduce that mill levy and say, we're going to give you, say, 3%, 4% increase, but we are not going to allow you to have a 55% increase in the amount of revenue that you can take in. So governments have that option to lower the mill levy, and it really comes down to people in that community, the constituents, being vocal about it. Some governments right now, I've heard of at least a few, have stated that one has already made a resolution, they're going to do it, are going to lower their mill levy. They are not going to saddle citizens with what is basically, could be potentially locking somebody out of their home. Because at the end of the day, if you don't pay your property taxes, there's a tax lien sold on it. And after about 3 years, that means somebody can take your property. Why? Because the government put the lien on it, this other person paid for the lien, and now your home is potentially no longer yours. Governments, some governments, know that the citizens can't bear that. We can't, people's incomes have not increased by 30, 40, 50%. like the values, and their incomes aren't going to afford it. Now, there was a Senate bill passed this year that gives a little reassurance, gives assurance, let's say, to local governments that they can temporarily reduce the mill levy without voter approval, which we already know. They don't have to have voter approval to lower it. But if they lower it and then raise it back up again later, the bill is stating that they would not have to go to voters in that case. Now, that's a temporary situation. We're going to see these property tax issues this is more than just this year, because property tax values look back the previous 2 years. So we're going to see the effects of this. This is not a one-time deal. We need to have a better solution than what the state is presenting us. And part of that is the mill levy relief. It's interesting to note Governor Polis has been called out on this more than a couple times by the media. And we know media, they like to, that's what they do. That's what the journalists do, is they're trying to catch the politicians, off guard, get an honest answer out of them. It's like Jerry Polis, try to get him to say, those checks in the mail are thanks to Taxpayers Bill of Rights. That is about the last words that you're going to hear out of him. There's been reporters trying to nail him down. Say it, say the word Tabor. And he's like, no. He does the spiel, but he doesn't say it. So Colorado counties, though, just put out a news release, and I've got it copied here, calling out Polis. And Colorado counties is a organization, almost like really a lobbyist group or organizational group for the counties. And it starts out, if the governor's comments were inaccurate, because Polis was talking about, well, we've told local governments to do something and they didn't do it. So we had to propose Proposition HH, which is a baloney, by the way. And they were discussing HH, I won't go off too far, months ago. And then they popped it out on us in the last week of the session. And then now he's trying to point the finger at local governments. You didn't do anything. So Colorado counties is calling them out here, 10 days ago, going, your comments were incorrect. And the counties have been working with the governor's office since the first of the year, said the executive director. And then they quoted him. But what the point to this really is that the notice of valuations reflecting this market that we've got came out in April, and just a couple months ago. The time to act is this December. See, I don't know, vote yes on Prop H. They're following in the same line here, that in December, these are when local governments set their mill levies. And that's applied to that total actual value. So I thought it was a very interesting press release that Colorado counties was calling out Polis. So going back to the calculation, let me show a couple real slides, and these are courtesy of Douglas County. They do a very good job laying it out. We've got residential property, and you see we've got, in this example, a $500,000 home. So we're going to have what the assessor sends in the notice. That's the actual value. So here's the assessor's part. Now we're going to take that times the current 6.765% assessment rate. Gives us the assessed value. And that's now your key driver in the equation. You take that assessed value times those mill levies. And it's each one of those on that property tax bill. So if it's the fire district or Park and Rec or a metropolitan or whichever one it is, each one of those are line items taking that assessed value by that levy itself. And in this case, the way this works out, a $500,000 home is now paying over $3,300 in taxes. To me, that's a lot of money. $3,300. I give credit to Taxpayers Bill of Rights that we have rates that seem high to me, but are nowhere near as bad as other parts of the country, because they don't have a TABOR. They don't have the protections in place. And we've got one other protection I'll talk about in a minute. where we've got Connecticut, New York areas where for a small, modest home, I believe they are upwards of several $1,000s, meaning $7,000 to $9,000. I don't have an example lined out here, but I can speak to having known about their excessive tax rates for years past. Recently ran into example, a friend, recent new friend, explained that the family farm they had in New York had to be, I forget if it's actually New York or Connecticut, I apologize, it was one of the two. They actually had to end up selling it because the property taxes had gotten so enormous on this huge family farm that they couldn't afford it. I know that from the people I speak to here in Colorado, just having property tax bills above $3,000 is putting a lot of people into quite a panic. And that's why we want to get the message out here, because there are ways that you can act and counter this versus just accepting what the state is trying to tell you. That's a residential property. Now I've got one here for vacant land. If we go back and if I went back to that side, which I don't want to, remember that we've got different assessment rates. That's the part where the state sets it. Vacant land is much higher. Instead of that 6.765, it's 27.9. If you look in this example, we have $150,000 actual value. Yet look at the taxes here, over $4,000. So in a way, we talked about Gallagher earlier and the repeal. It's easy to see a reason for voting to repeal Gallagher was to try to level this out. I mean, that's a very excessive amount of money. One would assume you're not making any money from vacant land, right? You're just paying a tax bill. The problem is Gallagher took out what was in the Constitution as a protection and made this whole mathematical formula. The legislators were in control of the game. And with the legislators in control of the game, we lost our negotiating power, our protections. That's really the fault of what occurred with that ballot issue that's aggravated this problem we have now. Now, there's two property tax protections that are in place, unless voters have waived them. And that's a really sad case that's happened too often. The Taxpayer's Bill of Rights, under the spending limit section, which is 7C, speaks to property taxation. And what it's saying here is that the maximum amount of increased spending you can have as a government is limited to inflation plus the prior calendar year's annual local growth. And what's that mean, local growth? That means construction. And then can be adjusted by property tax revenue changes. Now, the way TABOR was written, it was meant to limit exemptions or detaboring for 4 years. So it should be noted that any exemption that the government would claim that they have from spending limits was meant to be limited to a 4-year period. The courts, which are not in favor of the Taxpayer's Bill of Rights, have interpreted it differently. But it should be noted because just because the courts ruled improperly, they shouldn't be let off the hook for what they've done. So we've got the Taxpayer's Bill of Rights limit. And what that would really mean is, in boiling it down, with Jeffco, we've got a case here. The county has taken over collected $40 million, $39.5 million. Because they have the spending limit, we've fought to keep it here in Jeffco. They have to rebate or refund those over collected taxes. And the amount that they have to use for that equation is what's described here. They get to grow, the county gets to grow by inflation, plus that local growth. Now, I think that's a pretty fair way for government to grow. Government, on the other hand, public information officers, would claim that Tabor has restricted them, starved them. I mean, when Tabor was originally to be on the ballot, the governor at that time said, we were putting a sign on Colorado's borders, basically saying, Colorado's shut down for business if we put Tabor in. Now you can see Tabor's actually been really good for Colorado. You can see government is still operating. Matter of fact, we're going to get state refunds. That is, unless we, go along with the shenanigans that they're trying to give us in Prop HH. So Tabor's been good for us and does affect property taxes. The other thing that's there is protection for taxpayers, again, unless they waived their rights, is what's called the annual levy law. This is in state statute versus Tabor is part of our Constitution. So there's certain people who go, Tabor is the one that's limited everything. Well, actually, the annual levy law, a whole separate action, also has protections for us. What it's saying is it restricts the amount of total property tax revenue a local government can collect to an increase of 5.5%. This is found in Colorado Revised Statutes 29-1-301. So people can go look that up if they would like. Department of Local Affairs has pretty extensive amount of information on the annual levy law, because Department of Local Affairs, DOLA, is one that oversees that. And their website is actually really quite good. You can go in, you can look up all of these. I said there earlier, there's over nearly 3,000. It's right at 3,000 local governments. You can actually go into a tab on that webpage there, which I didn't bring up, and you can look up all these little districts on your property tax and see whether they have first the 5.5 cap. You can see their reports on their revenue. There's a variety of different things. But with DOLA overseeing the annual levy law, they also get a lot of questions about this. And I've got the 4 here that really tie, I think, to the core of it. So which local governments are subject to this property tax cap? Almost all of them, except, unfortunately, home rule municipalities. For those of us in the metro area, that's a good portion of us. But counties fall under this 5.5 cap. Fire districts, recreation districts, metropolitan districts. So a long list still of that 3,000 local bodies. And is the 5.5 the same thing as Tabor? Well, I hope clearly described that no, they are separate things. And if a local government is detabored, meaning unfortunately they gave away their rights, does that mean that the 5.5 doesn't apply to them? No, these are separate issues. Now, unfortunately, in a lot of ballot issues, there's a very sly move that the people who draft the ballot question use to get people to waive both of their rights. What it will state in the ballot question is the government allowed to keep the overcollected taxes so that they don't have to comply with Tabor, but they won't say Tabor, they'll say Article 10, Section 20, or maybe not even that much. Maybe it'll be like the state of Colorado with Prop Horrible Hoax, HH, or the different other variations of HH that people have come up with, where they're calling it our Tabor refunds a surplus, which is a very deceptive way to say you're giving up your Tabor refund, your direct Tabor refund, and more if you go with it. But they'll also say any other law. So it's basically saying, can the government keep your Tabor refunds and any restriction and waive any restriction under any other law. And that's the key word, any other law. Well, what they're talking about when they say any other law is the 5.5 cap. Now, I think most people, especially prior to this property tax spike that we've got, most people would say that government growth at 5.5% is quite reasonable. I mean, what's the average increase in income and salaries for those of us who are actually supporting government with our daily work. 5.5 is fairly reasonable. But for the government to slide that language into ballot questions and get people to waive their rights, somebody should be held accountable for that, frankly. And we don't have that power right now. And it's something we should address in the future. And I think there are actually some movements to do that. The government has continued to put bias into questions, and we haven't been able to keep up with it to ensure there's transparency so people really know what they're voting on. Proposition HH is a perfect example of deceitful language. And then finally, a lot of people think, well, the 5.5% applies just to their property, perhaps. No, it is across that whole body. So when the government is setting that mill levy in November timeframe, that's where that should be considered. Across the board, is Jefferson County going to keep it at the 5.5 cap or not? Is Arapahoe County going to keep it at the 5.5? That's where they apply that. It's not simply on a single bill where you get to go in and say, my neighbor went up only 4%, but I went up, 33%. I should apply to the 5.5. That's not the way that works. So that's the last slide. And I don't know, if I helped you maybe learn a little more. I hope for the audience members, if they get a better grasp of how to look this up. I didn't go into a website. I can do that right now if you would like, to show how to do a quick lookup.
I could just include the links, or if you want, if you want to do one, actually, just a quick little lookup on something, that's fine. Or we could do that in a future video as well.
Let me, you know what? Actually, let's hold on that one.
Gotcha. Well, I got to say, Natalie, it was a very informative presentation. I really appreciate all the work and all your knowledge that you have. It's very interesting. And some of the thoughts I have is, for one, just shows how important Tabor is by preventing any statewide property tax and also limiting some of what they can do. Really key factor to defend Tabor and really up the efforts to do so. It's step one. Step two, also seeing how the different levels of how our property taxes are calculated. There's a definite opportunity for activism at the local level and your local governments. Some of those 3,000 that are there to get involved at that level. And then also at the county level with the assessor and how they're doing their evaluations, but also at the state legislative level. And I think, holding these legislators accountable come election time for their failure to limit the property taxes, they're part of it, or, of course, them pushing for higher property taxes and schemes like we've seen with Proposition HH. So lots of opportunities for people to get involved at all different levels and lots to look at there. But I really appreciate it. It was very interesting. And I think that was a very clear and concise explanation of a very complicated subject.
One thing I will note is this time of year is usually when the local governments are working on their budgets. The budgets are driven by mill levies. Waiting till October, November gets you in the game a little bit late. People who are just, getting to comprehend that they're going to have a really big January bill if they don't have the protections. Hopefully there's overwhelming vote to protect Tabor and vote no on HH. So getting involved with the local governments now, at least go to a meeting or just figure out what is my mill levy? How much are they, bringing in? Just starting to kind of figure that out so that they're a little bit educated before they go and speak to their county commissioners or the park and rec district elected officials, city officials, whichever. Even if a home rule municipality like mine, Lakewood, even if that 5.5 cap doesn't apply, it is so important to remember that government can lower that mill levy without having to go to voters. They can provide that property tax relief. They are taking millions, if not getting into billion plus of our money to provide affordable housing. And the number one thing they could do for across the board to help people would be cutting mill levies, reducing property taxes, because that makes housing more affordable. It means people can afford to buy the refrigerator on its last leg, put in the roof that they need to, variety of different things. These are the things that make housing more affordable. Shockingly high government taxes are not going to help the situation at all. Local elected officials need to step up, write together a resolution saying we are going to do a temporary mill levy reduction. We're going to cap it at 4%, whatever it may be, but they have that power to do that. Citizens are going to have to prompt them, sometimes poke them to get a reaction. And maybe elected officials don't even understand exactly how property taxes are calculated. So there's where hopefully audience members can walk in, be very confident as we go through this series and say, here's how this works. You as an elected official, I'm counting on you to make a difference here.
Exactly. And I think also an opportunity for candidates for local office, people who have an aspiring political career, to make this really part of your campaign, part of your promise to your voters, is to go in there and reduce mill levies, do everything possible to provide property tax relief and defend the Taxpayer Bill of Rights.
I love it. We're going to talk about that a little bit later, aren't we?
Looking forward to it, Natalie. Well,
Me
perfect.
too.
Well, thank you so much for your time. Is there anything else you'd like to leave us with this time?
Um, no, I think I'm pretty good. It says pretty there's a lot of parts to this, so I think breaking this up into a few pieces is good. We're going to get into some more exciting parts later on, talking about protesting property taxes, abatements, and how you can do these different things. Even if you've just catching on to it now, there's ways you can actually do some things retroactively. So we're going to try to teach people. And like you said, now we've got candidates, people running for these different offices, and pressuring them, getting them to make a promise to really make it an affordable community. We'll see if they make good on their promises and get them motivated to do it.
Perfect. Well, thank you so much, and I can't wait till next time.
Thanks.